So I'm here to talk briefly about a project that was funded by the Seed Box in 2015 and which just launched this spring in late April, beginning of May. And I want to thank my colleagues first who are not here. There were 5 of us making up an interdisciplinary team. Myself, I am I study literature and the history of science. Lauren Lefauci, who's here at Linköping, is also an American literature scholar and an environmental humanities person. Then we had Don Sanders at Gothenburg, who works on science pedagogy. We had a biologist with us, Mara Flannery, a plant biologist, and finally a graduate student horticulturalist at Madison. And the 5 of us together, we were thinking about the place of plants in our world and the fact that plants often get left out of narratives when we're thinking about environmental preservation, change, conservation. The discourse is very often about animals. And we forget the fact that without plants, many of us, we would have a very short time left on this planet without plants. And so we got to thinking about what are the ways in which we can encourage people to think about the plants that they encounter on a daily basis. And our question was fairly simple, which is this idea that everyone has a story to tell about a plant. What's yours? So it's sort of a different way of approaching that same issue of narrative that we opened up with, and encouraging people to tell their stories. A side note about we are desperately trying to reach outside of academic audiences. I have roped pretty much everyone in my family, for instance, to try to help us generate stories, because it can often be it can be a difficult process for someone to volunteer their stories. But I do have a funny aside. When I was just at an academic history, history of science conference in Europe, and I was telling my fellow people, academics, about this, and they said, "Well, what century are you dealing with?" And I said, "No, this one, right now. You can write a story. Tell me about your houseplants. You know, how are they doing?" So to that end, we have created this website to encourage people to submit their stories. These are some of the stories. We have about 50 stories that have come in so far. We have stories in French, English, Italian, Swedish. We have stories that we are starting to collect from around the world, stories from people of all ages, from an 8-year-old to a 93-year-old. And what we do when we get the stories in is that we curate them. And part of our methodology here part of our metaphor here is the herbarium specimen sheet. So herbarium specimen sheets are scientific, but also artistic documents that typically record the quote-unquote discovery of a plant within the scientific narrative. But they were also social documents. Many people, regular people, plant enthusiasts would make their own herbaria, and they would share them with their friends. They would share them with scientific friends, non-scientific friends, etc. And in the herbaria, we have this record of a very long interaction of human and plants. This herbarium specimen sheet here is one of the oldest that's been found. It's from, I think, 1514, and it's in Leiden, but it's an Italian herbaria originally. So what we do is we find these, we include these herbaria specimen sheets, and then we curate the images. Often people will send us photographs with their images. These are all photographs sent in by this author. And then where they're in a language other than English, we'll also include an English translation as well. We also, in a way to try to encourage people to send us just quick stories, we also have what we're calling a snapshot story, which is people will send us an image, and then we have on a contact sheet right here, we'll ask them, what is your plant story? Tell us your story. And you can submit a story, and then if you don't feel confident to write a long story, we just have some questions that you might answer. Does this plant remind you of something? If the plant could tell you something about itself, what would it say? The effort here is to get people to recognize the plant itself as this being that has, that's part of a network of relationships. Some interesting things that have come to us from the first 50 stories that we have collected is that people often write a story about a plant that is not in their immediate area. So we are getting a lot of stories from people who are remembering plants from their past and remembering plants in places that don't necessarily inhabit the spaces where they are right now. As you were talking about your chaparral, right? And the fact that we actually may not even recognize consciously that we are connecting, we are connected to landscapes that may not be where we are, but that this is not a bad thing. And what we are starting to think about now is that this actually expands our locus of concern beyond the merely local and gets us to think about how we are connected to places both where we are and also outside of where we are, and how we might then expand our circle of concern. We're trying to build this into a comprehensive site that will also teach people about plants. So we have resource pages, we have links to other kinds of information networks about plants and people. And tomorrow we're about to take our show live, if you will, and we are going to do an interactive activity with children that we have for children tomorrow at the museum, where Lauren Lefauci and I spent a couple of days here in lovely Sweden collecting plants and pressing them for students to make their own herbaria sheets and then to tell us their stories about their plants. So if you want to contribute, please do. If you want to encourage people to contribute, again, we're trying to reach not the usual suspects, right? So if you can get people to who might want to share a story with us, please do that. The information's here, and I can let you know again the site. It's www.herbaria3.org. Okay, thank you. I think that's it.